record. Okay, so we didn't get prayers and record, but we got record. Okay, we are studying the Revelation, but we are starting with some Old Testament and specifically Daniel, but we're going to be looking at Ezekiel also today. But before we do that, I want to remind you that sort of our ground rules or red flags or whatever you want to call it is our willingness to unlearn some things that we might have been taught in the past, to stay with the word and not the internet, and don't get distracted. And with that sort of backdrop, do you want to talk about the airplane?
Yeah, I got a couple of things. We're doing this as a way to prepare for getting into Revelation. I grew up in a time where people just got lost, worrying about things that they shouldn't be worried about, and it's not only a distraction; it can take you completely away from this life and from the things that we're supposed to do. So a couple of things. I'm going to do this maybe for one more week after this, before we jump into Revelation in full. But we have read about prophecies. Daniel sees a vision. He's down at the river. He's praying. He's mourning, and he sees this angel come with a message for him. But the description of the angel is just almost beyond words. I want you to consider something. The way these things work, these kinds of visions. Suppose Native Americans, the Indians that lived here 150, 200 years ago, suppose an airplane came and flew in and landed in front of them. And there's a little ladder and people start lining up. The door opens on the side and people start walking in to the door of this airplane, right? What would those people see? What would they think they saw? They would have seen a big bird, right? It's got to be a big bird because that's as far as their experience can go. And the bird has a mouth on the side of its head, and people come up and walk in and sacrifice themselves. And if you look, you can see the bodies of people the bird has already swallowed behind its two eyeballs in front, right? That's what they would see. And that's what they would describe. And it's not that it's a shortcoming. It's simply sometimes we have to be shown things in terms that we can understand. And with these visions that Daniel sees, for instance, the idea of the outfit that shines like beryl stones, which is maybe a green, sort of like an aquamarine, but it is splendor, and Daniel sees this angel in a way that makes sense to him. And I'm not trying to I'm trying to tell you, we're not capable, I don't believe, of understanding the full splendor of God or of these angels. We're not really equipped to get the whole story. And so we do the best we can. And when we read prophecies and visions, and it's going to be really important when we get to Revelation, that those things are not, it's not literal in the sense that when there are 7 lampstands that John sees, and he says they represent 7 churches. What do lampstands do? They hold up the light, yes? That's what the church's mission is. That's what they do. And in this vision, when he sees the throne surrounded by 7 lampstands, and he understands those represent 7 churches, that symbolism of lampstands, it doesn't mean that God's sitting there and there's 7, he needs 7 lampstands to see the light. That's what churches do. And so, and I can tell you, maybe sometime I'll actually tell you, but when you have one of those dreams, sometimes things, you may understand what it means, but it doesn't look like what you would see with your waking eyes. So keep that in mind, especially as we move through some of these prophets' visions and prepare to move into Revelation. going to need to be that flexible with what is described. One of the other things that has, let me throw one other thing in, because we're trying to prepare everybody for Revelation. Most of you at our age have heard about something called the rapture, right? They tell us that's when God's church is caught up, and we're called up to meet him in the air. And I grew up being taught that. Do you know that that's not in the Bible? It's not in the Bible. It's absolutely not in Revelation. Absolutely. Nobody, I mean, I haven't found anybody bold enough to say, oh yeah, that's what that is. But
Can I read the place where they think it is?
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
But you tell
it's in First Thessalonians.
So this is what and Scott always rails at theologians. And so I grew up Catholic, so I wasn't into some of this stuff until I was in college. But, there's all these theories about the rapture. So those of us who are believers, we're either going to be raptured up to heaven or
premillennial, postmillennial, dispensationalism. I mean, they have names for everything. But there are so many people will tell you things that they're very confident in. And all we can be responsible for is what's in the scriptures.
So just as those of you, those words don't mean anything, that you're going to be raptured up, you're going to, as believers, before the 7 years tribulation, in the middle of it, or after it. So anyhow, and then when Scott's telling me this week, this isn't in Revelations, I'm thinking it's got to be in Revelations. He says, no, it's in First Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13 through 18. I'm going to read this to you. Brothers, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you will not grieve like the rest who are without hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, we also believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. By the word of the Lord, we declare to you that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will be the first to rise. After that, we who are alive will remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. The important words in that, above everything else, is we'll be with him forever. The people in Thessalonica were concerned about believers who've died. And Paul is telling them, you don't need to be concerned. They will be raised, they will be with him, and they'll be with you. Did he get some special message about, being called up? I don't know. Do I really think that we live in the clouds? I mean, is that an example of one of those things that we have to see a certain way to be able to understand the best we can what happens when we live after we die? Probably. But the point is, they based this whole thing, and it was only in the 1830s. What was the guy's name? John Nelson Darby. So he's a theologian in the 1830s. So no one took this section that I just read and called it the rapture into 1830.
I have not been able to find any evidence that anybody thought Paul was making end time prophecy. He was reassuring those in Thessalonica who were grieving over the Christians who had died. They're worried about them. And Paul gives them this explanation. He says, no, don't be worried about them. They're going to come. They're going to be with us, and they're going to be with him forever. It's okay. And this guy took that and turned it into this other thing. And it got some following, but in the early 70s, Hal Lindsey puts out The Late Great Planet Earth. And then right behind that, The Left Behind. And it became an industry. People got so obsessed with this that they were buying books and watching movies. And I grew up in a household, and I grew up in a church where people got obsessed. And there was one time when the lights went out and my mother had us pack in the car. We're heading for the hills, right? It's very, very damaging. And it's not biblical, it's not scriptural, and yet probably all of you have been taught, I don't have to worry, I'm not going to be here, right? And what does that do? That tells us, we don't need to worry about anything. We don't, all this, that's fine. There's another place, and I sent this to some of this week, but in Matthew, this is chapter 24. Jesus is teaching, and he says, he's talking about if the master of the house knew what hour the thief was coming, he wouldn't let his house get broken into. But the teaching, he goes on, he says, who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of his household to give others their food at the proper time? That's supposed to be us. He left us in that position. And he says, who's the good and faithful servant the master has left in charge of the household? And he says, blessed is that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. And the message, very clear, I could read more, but the message is, we have a job to do. We've been left here, those of us who are believers have been left here with a job to do. And if we spend our time worrying about something that's going to happen and how terrible things are going to be, we don't spend our time doing the things we're supposed to do. And I've watched it in action to the point that people literally lost their life, their mission, their work, their witness, because they're spending all their time talking about, all these things that are going to happen during the tribulation. So why do we even study it? Well, we're concerned. And if you really read it, just like Daniel's, the message, he's concerned about the fate of the Jews. And he's mourning, he's praying, he's asking for forgiveness for the nation because he says, we've turned aside and we didn't turn to you. And so he's in mourning, and he gets sent this messenger who says, look, here's things that are going to happen. Bottom line, don't worry about it. The Jews are still going to be there at the end. You're going to play a part. Don't spend your time. Don't get wrapped up in this. And so when we study, the question that I ask, and I had to ask it a lot in business, people would ask for information. They would ask for a report. And I said, what would you do with that information if you had it? If I provided you a daily report that showed you X, Y, Z, how would you manage the company differently? And there's always these blank expressions. Well, I just want to know. Yeah, no, see, because you're here to manage shipping. What will you do with this information? How about if I give you this information instead that'll help you do your job? That's what we're dealing with. And what we're trying to do in this early part is to prepare you, because there are a lot of things that we've been taught. There are a lot of things that have hit popular culture that really aren't taught in the scriptures. And a lot of it, if we go at it from the angle of saying, I'm so worried about how things will be during this 7 years, you've got a job to do today. What do I say? The Europe in Texas, the expressions, never mind if the horse goes blind, just load the wagon, right? Load the wagon. We can study this, we can understand it, as long as we understand that the message is, don't worry. We're not supposed to live in fear. And so we see there will be wars and rumors of wars and everything else, but in the end, the outcome is already decided. So with that in mind, I'm sorry, I took time, but I'll hand it back to Mary.
So last week we ended up at the end of Daniel 10, and we talked about this was the last vision Daniel got, and he was in his 90s. He had been in Babylon since he was a mid-teen, and this was the last one that's recorded, his last vision that's recorded. And Gabriel the archangel had come to him and said, I'm going to explain what this means. And last week we spent a lot of time looking at, I'm going to explain what this means. I'm sorry, I heard 21 days ago when you prayed out to me, and I was busy fighting the Prince of Persia. And we talked about that. And at the end of chapter 10, and this is another great example of how there were no chapters and verses, at the end of chapter 10 and the beginning of chapter 11, he says, this is Gabriel the archangel says, okay, I'm going to tell you what this means, but I've got to do it quickly because I got to get back.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start on verse 20 of, yeah. I'm sorry. Okay. So I'm sorry. Daniel 10, verse 20. Do you know why I've come to you? He said, I must return at once to fight against the Prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, behold, the Prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. Yet no one has the courage to support me against these except Michael, your prince. And I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, stood up to strengthen and protect him. Now then, I will tell you the truth. 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and then a 4th, who will be far richer than the others. By the power of his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece.
There's a point there where, yes, sir.
Sure. Can I ask you?
Is the mic on?
Yes.
All right.
So Mary finishes reading 10:21 and says, "And as for me," who is speaking now? Is this still Gabriel?
Yes.
It's the angel, and we presume Gabriel. The name's not given this time, but we presume that.
So he's saying, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him.
Yes.
Why would an angel of God want to
Strengthen
strengthen
Darius.
a Persian Mede who is going to be one of these great thrones that are mentioned?
It's a great question, and I'll be sure everybody at home heard it. The angel says to Daniel that in the first year of Darius, I came and strengthened him. If you remember the prophecy, the first one that Daniel clears up, the dream, there's the statue with the 4 different parts. There are important things that are necessary that are going on this earth. Darius is a new ruler, and when he comes to power, there are other princes, there are other kingdoms. Always the nature of these kinds of rulers is they want to rule everything. And Darius plays a really important part, as does Cyrus after him. Cyrus winds up sending the Jews back to Israel with the money and the supplies to rebuild the temple. It's been prophesied. He plays a very important part. But when Darius first takes over, he's vulnerable. And what's really incredible about this statement is that because I've tried to get people to understand, God used Cyrus to rebuild the temple. He used a pagan king to rebuild for his purposes.
And Cyrus is a Persian Mede?
Yes,
He's a Persian, right? Just
Persian.
yeah.
Okay.
He's his Persian.
But at this time, the Jews are being held captive by the Babylonians.
They are.
And hence, I guess, eventually, as you said, these kings want to rule everything. So eventually, the Persians override the Babylonians.
Correct.
Okay.
They've defeated the Babylonians, and you see that through that vision of the statue, everything happens in its appointed time, and they have a purpose. But at the early part of this, Darius is still a human king, and there are still other kingdoms out there. He's vulnerable. And this angel, and we'll call him Gabriel, comes and says, I actually, in the first year of Darius's rule, I came to strengthen him because he plays an important part. And it is alien to us because of what we've been taught, that God would actually strengthen a pagan king. And yet here we have it. You have 2 choices.
You either accept it or you say, I don't believe what the scriptures say. And that's always a possibility. Yes, your mic on?
But I
Yep, I have.
oh, okay. Well, so, okay, so basically, there's always the opponent to God's plan.
Oh, very good.
And so they are trying to fight the opponent to God's plan, who we would call Satan, who is trying to disrupt the plan by, hey, let's take Darius out and that'll ruin his plan. So you have to look at it from why would angels have to go and defend a bad guy? Because the bad guy is the main feature in God's plan. Just like, yes, he came to save the Jews. He came to save the whole world. Jews first, because he was born Jewish into Judaism. But he went to the Gentiles. He went to everybody. So it's not just, well, Paul, perfect example. There's a guy persecuting Christians. Why does God choose him? And why does that happen? And why? Because that's part of all the plans. So they're always fighting an opponent.
There is, in fact, battle that takes place, and we see that from what we talked about last week. Humans battle against each other, but what we see in Daniel is that there is, in fact, an influence, that there's a battle against God himself. And that's hard for us to, why does he allow that? And I can't speak to that. But yes, there is opposition to God's plan. And if we can short circuit the plan, the prophecy, then the whole thing falls apart. I have a scripture from Ezekiel, but I'll just tell you, Ezekiel is given word from God, and God says something about, my servant Cyrus, and that he will do the job I've set out for him, and that the temple or Jerusalem will be rebuilt. God actually worked through Cyrus, and it's why the prophecy is why of Daniel is the way it is. And so what we're telling here, we're going to see more evidence of these things coming up in the Revelation. You have to begin to understand that there's more here than meets the eye, or Revelation is just a scary story.
I think, Jean, did you want to say something? No, I guess not. Okay. We are.
Excuse me, Mary, can you hear me?
Yes.
Isn't that the purpose of Cyrus being labeled my servant?
To rebuild the temple. Yes.
But it's more than just the temple. He's in human terms fighting the upper battles, the heavenly battles going on to the one God. And he's under attack and challenged every single day by kings and emperors and all those people that think they want to be God.
My belief is that the battles are not separable. They're simultaneously, and they're both part of one bigger struggle. But
Correct.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Do I think that Cyrus necessarily intended to serve Yahweh? I don't see any evidence of it, and yet God works with him. Yeah.
And that's not the first example.
No, it's not.
Or the last.
Or the last.
So back to 11:2, Scott. Gabriel is explaining that there will be a mighty king will arise that will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. And we're not going to go through all of 11, but just set the stage here.
There's a certain place in this section of Daniel where he's talking to Daniel about things that are going to come to pass in the near future. And then you can see a clear break where suddenly he's talking about end times. And you see the parallels. You see how similar they are. Why are they similar? Why is the near-term prophecy of Antiochus so similar to this Antichrist that comes at the end? And this is another part of the preparation for Revelation. Human beings most of them desire power. And we have seen people rise through, history that wanted to rule the world. When John gets his revelation, he's on the island of Patmos. Patmos is a penal colony. It's a prison island. And he's there because he's threatening to the Roman leadership. The Roman Caesars have declared that they are gods. They demand worship. John has spoken against it, and they find it threatening. He's an old man. They don't have him killed, but they stick him out on Patmos where he can't really talk to anybody. This desire for world domination is as old as human beings. That's what's going to happen in the Revelation when the Antichrist comes. He's just going to be better at it than anybody who's come before him. And because he's being strengthened directly by Satan himself. I want to read you something here real quick. This is from Ezekiel. This is a prophecy through Ezekiel, and this is Ezekiel 28. And God has spoken to Ezekiel. The word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, tell the ruler of Tyre. Tyre is a region up kind of north of Israel. Tell the ruler of Tyre, this is what the Lord says. Your heart is proud. You have said, I am a god. This ruler of Tyre at that time of Ezekiel has become very powerful, very splendid, and he's declared, I'm a god. And the rest of this prophecy, I'm not going to go again. It's Ezekiel 28, if you want to read it for yourself. But the rest of this prophecy is God telling this ruler, you aren't a god, I am. And I'm going to send foreigners into your country, and they're going to throw you down. Are you going to tell them as they are throwing you into the sea that you're a god? No, you're going to be a regular man. You're suddenly going to realize I was never a god.
Let me just read verse 9 because it sort of sums it up. So this is 28:9 in Ezekiel. Will you still say, this is when he's being overcome by the another group of people. Will you still say, I am a god in the presence of those who slay you? You will be only a man, not a god, in the hands of those who wound you. You will die the death of the uncircumcised at the hands of foreigners. For I have spoken, declares the Lord.
So are you going to be spouting that you're a god when I send these people in to take you down? No, you're not. And the reason, as I keep saying, that we're going into this now is to prepare for Revelation, because this one known as the Antichrist is going to do things just like have been done before, but on steroids. You understand, this is going to be the final fruition. Men and women have desired world domination because their hearts are turned. They don't serve Yahweh. They don't see it. They've desired this and declared themselves gods. Eventually, we're going to talk about the Antichrist in Revelation, and he's going to do the same thing. He's just going to do it more effectively than anyone who's ever come before him.
And the only difference is it's the last time it'll happen.
Right. It's going to be the last time. But just like this king of Tyre, the message from God is you're going to be put down, right? You're not a god. I am. You're going to be put down. And to those of us who have access to this, we should look at it and go, oh, I don't have to get so wrapped up when I see these people. You know, we have technology now. They can see anything you buy. They can control what you buy. They just haven't done it yet. That sounds a lot like what goes on in Revelation. And the message that we get is, yeah, no kidding. Other ones have tried to do the same thing. This is going to happen. Don't get so wrapped up in it and don't be so afraid of it. In the end, God wins. We'll be with him. Enough said.
So
Well, except that I think that there's that message to us. You got to believe and you got to have that faith, and that's what's going to pull you through, because the attacks are coming.
It's always there, and you're absolutely right. And that will be part of the message when we do get to Revelation, that there will be some who keep the faith while others cave in and say, hey, I'm going to go along to get along. That you're right, Gene. That's a part of it. And that's going to become what I'm trying to prepare for. We're trying to prepare for right now, though, is when we reach Revelation, that we're not approaching it with this 1970s, fear doctrine that says, "Oh, be very afraid of the coming of the tribulation." No, that's the point of this. Do we worry about things? Are we given some reassurance? Yes, we are, and it's enough reassurance to when we finally get through it to say, "Okay, I get it now." These people who tried to frighten me all of my childhood they completely lost their way.
So 11 goes through, if you read all of 11, so much of the things happen just as Gabriel said. And I'm going to go ahead to Daniel 11, verse 27. And we're going to be talking about Antiochus the Fourth and how he was a really bad guy. And when you look at him, you could say he could be the Antichrist, except Jesus hadn't come yet. So, this was another example. Like Scott says, this has happened before. Powerful men, I guess women, I don't know examples of women yet, but it could be coming. But anyhow, examples of men who thought they were God and were trying to take over things. But before I start reading at Daniel 11, verse 27, Scott made me put a note saying, remember don't lose sight of what Gabriel was telling Daniel. He was telling him, he was assuring him that what would happen to his people, what they would go through, but that they would be okay.
That's true.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
so
always
don't
good
forget
when
that.
somebody in the Bible comes out and says, this is why I'm telling you this. It's pretty good idea not to lose sight of the reason why we're being told that, or they were being told that. And the angel says, I'm going to give you this knowledge of your people in the future.
Okay, so listen to this, verse 27. And the two kings, with their hearts bent on evil, will speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for still the end will come at the appointed time. The king of the north will return to his land with great wealth, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, so he will do damage and return to his own land. You just want to say,
this is Antiochus. This is a guy who basically behaves like he thinks he's a god, and he prevents the Jews from worshiping. He takes up all the copies of the Torah. He sacrifices pigs on the idol. He defiles the temple.
Well, I'm going to get into that in a second. What he has done right now, he has gone down to the south, the Egypt area. He has not won a war. He's going back home and he's mad. And so in between where he lives and where he was fighting is Israel, and he's taking it out on the people of Israel.
And the reason that's important is when we get to Revelation, you're going to see something very similar with the king of the north and the king of the south doing battle. This is a foreshadowing of exactly what happens in Revelation. You'll be able to see the parallel so clear. You have to wonder, well, is this the same thing? Well, no, it's two different things. But what we see is it's just a different flavor of the same ice cream.
So, but going back to the end of 28, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, against the people of Israel. So he will do damage and return to his own land. Verse 29, at the appointed time, he will invade the south again, but this time will not be like the first. Ships at Kittim will come against him, and he will lose heart. Then he will turn back and rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he will return and show favor to those who forsake the holy covenant. His forces will rise up and desecrate the temple fortress. They will abolish the daily sacrifice and set up the abomination of desolation.
You're going to hear that word or that phrase, the abomination of desolation, in Revelation. But also, Jesus tells his disciples, and when you see the abomination that causes desolation in the temple, you're going to know the time is near. So we see this repetition. We see that it's always the same thing. It is Satan literally through human beings battling against God. And the same thing has happened multiple times. They rage against Jerusalem, they rage against the temple. And in the book of Revelation, that's going to factor prominently. It's going to center a lot of it around Jerusalem and around the temple. So what we're trying to show you is when we get there, you're going to go, oh, hey, wait a minute, this sounds just like what happened. But yeah, it is. It's a whole lot like it. People look for the end times. I can't tell you how many times recently I've had people say, I think this is the beginning of the end time. I think this, don't you agree? Do you think this is the beginning? And they're looking for this thing to happen, right? And when Jesus says, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, you're going to know. Most of you know I fished a lot in my life. And I had flounder boats. You go along, they're laying on the bottom, and you can barely see them, and you stick them with a gig. We used to go out, and when we first cut the lights on, we would gig everything. Oh, look, that's a shell. Oh, it's a shell. But, we gig it, and it would go clank. And everything looked like a flounder until you see a flounder. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, man, none of those things really look like a flounder. What was I thinking? That's a flounder. That was obviously not one. Why was I worried about that? Why was I interested in that? This is the end time pursuit. This is the end time obsession of people looking for, oh, this is the beginning of the end. When it's here, you'll know it. Everything looks like a flounder till you see a flounder. And I'm going to tell you, everything looks like the end times until the end times actually come. People thought Hitler was the Antichrist. People thought several of the Caesars were the Antichrist because they're doing the same thing. They're trying to dominate people and wrest them away from God and wind up with them worshiping them, the leaders. Yes, sir.
So, just as you're saying, okay, it says there, the abomination that causes desolation. So only when Jesus says it are we to understand that will be the last time that there will be abomination of desolation in the temple.
We understand it from studying the Revelation, which eventually I promise we're going to get to.
Right.
Because the last chapter, to say it real clear. But yes, and they may not. I think they certainly didn't understand that was prophecy when Jesus said it. I suspect his disciples didn't really get it, but they knew the term abomination of desolation because it's happened before. And all of these other times were to prepare humanity, to prepare us that when the time comes, we see it, we recognize it, but we also have the understanding to say, this doesn't frighten me. Okay, this doesn't make me think, oh my gosh, we're all going to be wiped out, or oh my gosh, this person is going to take over. I won't be able to worship God anymore because they won't let me. No, yes, you can. Yes, you can. But people have been killed over it. But yeah, you don't have to sacrifice your faith because some powerful ruler says, I'm a God.
And I think that's, pardon me, Mary, I think that's part of the lesson of the repeated examples. The individuals don't take that message to heart within themselves so that you can try to adjust and do what is the right thing and not what the earthly people are advocating. You got to make your peace with the Almighty right now, not wait for any end time.
And you're going to see that when we get to Revelation. And by now, some of you must have begun to suspect that by the time we get to Revelation, we're going to be going, what's the big deal, right? I mean, it's really not And this is so important to me because, as I told you, I grew up in a very sick version of Revelation, and I saw the damage that it did to people. And we don't have to live like that.
Yeah, so by desolation of the temples, so it's not the abandonment of faith, it is the wiping out of the people, or I'm not missing the point.
That's a good question too. This abomination that causes desolation. Let's look at Antiochus, the one that Daniel is being told about that's going to come, the Greek.
So remember, this was a prophecy that Daniel had, and this came to be just like it was said. Go ahead.
But what he does is he hates this worship of Yahweh. There is something within him, and you can say that it's just a human thing, or you can say that this is his spirit being, led by Satan himself. But he comes in with rage against the Jews and with rage against the temple, and he tries to defile it in a way that they're no longer able to worship Yahweh. They're no longer able to offer the sacrifice because the altar is defiled. This is a way of trying to pull them away from Yahweh himself. And the desolation, of course, is what it leaves behind it. In Antiochus' time, and I'll just tell you a little bit of history, in that time, a lot of the Jews were afraid and they abandoned the temple. They abandoned the sacrifice. They abandoned Yahweh. It got so bad that the high priest offered bribes to Antiochus. They paid him money for the privilege of being high priest, right? One of the high priests had his brother killed so that his brother wouldn't take over the high priesthood from him. And then there was his mother killed because there's another son that she favored. The priesthood during this time becomes utterly corrupt more deeply than you probably could imagine. So the worship of Yahweh has been in the temple at the highest levels has been corrupted. This is the desolation that's caused by that. And the purpose Antiochus had was to do just that. The purpose that the Antichrist will have is to do just that. And there will be people who say, you know what? I see where the power is. I see, which way the wind is blowing. This guy is powerful. If I resist him, he might kill me. If I join him, he'll reward me. I'll get rich. That's the desolation. It is the destruction of faith and service to Yahweh they were created to be. It's no different with us.
Thank you.
So verse 32, we're still, these are things that historically happened. So these are prophecies that have occurred, but will also occur again. Verse 32, with flattery, he will corrupt those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. This is what Scott said. Those with insight will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by a sword or a flame, or be captured or plundered. Now, when they fall, they will be granted a little help, that many will join them insincerely. Some of the wise will fall, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time.
So this is Antiochus still, and you see that by flattery, he'll get a bunch of people to leave worship of Yahweh and follow him. He's a good politician. He knows how to wield power. And you'll hear that same word about using flattery in Revelation about the Antichrist. It's just incredible because it's the same process. And you notice that it says that some will fall. Some of the people will be killed. And when it comes to this time of Revelation, there are going to be people who say, no, I won't abandon my faith. And some of them will be killed. Some of them will be ruined financially. That's the way these people wield power. And I'm sorry about the revelation, the idea that, oh, I don't have to worry about it, I'm going to get pulled out. Because what that does is it tells people, I'm going to get pulled out of here, and all the bad people are going to be punished. And God's going to leave them without any sort of witness, without anybody trying to tell them different. And we're all going to be gone. And it's just going to be the earth here with these bad people getting spanked all the time, just getting, beaten up. Well, there have been times through history, these kingdoms. How about the Soviet Union? How bad did people suffer under the Soviets, right? Life gets really yucky. And if you resist them, they throw you in jail, they take your land, or they might just kill you. I'm sorry, but when it comes to this tribulation time in Revelation, that's going to happen to people who say they won't deny their faith. They'll stay loyal to Yahweh. It's going to happen to some people. If we're around, if it happens that quickly, it could happen to some of us. I've told you before, when we were in Jerusalem, the Golden Dome, the big temple, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, there's a big ramp that runs up to it. And I wanted to go see it. And I said, can I just go up there? And they said, oh, yeah. When you get to the door, you have to speak 3 truths. There is no God but Allah. Muhammad is his prophet. And I forget what the third one was. And you deny your faith, and they let you in. And I said, oh, I'm not going to do that. And the person told me, you don't have to mean it. Just say the words. This should all begin to get tied together with you. Deny your faith. Just deny your faith, and I'll give you what you want. That's the story of Revelation of what's going to happen during that time. But it's also, Daniel gets this prophecy of Antiochus, and it's exactly what happened. They literally took over the high priesthood, all of the priesthood in Israel through coercion, power, and bribery. Yes, John Paul.
That wasn't the last time that happened. That happened when Caiaphas took over and was at the head of he got there the exact same way.
He did.
And he turned everybody to the tribes and killed tribes, but that was part of the plan. It's always the plan.
They began to serve literally Satan.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is a word that people, we've been mocked. Anybody who admits there's a literal Satan, they've made a point of mocking us. But you're right. Caiaphas, the high priest, when they took Jesus before that, tribunal and decided they were going to kill him, it was exactly the corruption of the temple and the priesthood. It is abomination. You're right. It's the same story.
And that also, they say that the curtain tore to the Holy of Holies, but there was a twofold to that. The reason why it was, the temple was abominated by those people. So there, God was accessible to everyone at the time. It was also that this form of worship
Is over.
is over. It's done. We're not going back to it. So we're on a forward march. Whenever that the bride is done. And there's no, and there's warning. Every book of the Bible almost is a warning, is a foreshadowing, is a telling you in one direction. And before there was direction, but now we're on the last march.
All right. So we're literally have 1 minute, and you said something, and I'm sorry, we're just going to have to pick this up next week. We aren't going to finish the paragraph even. But John Paul just said something, and it's really, really important. Throughout the Bible, throughout the Old Testament especially, you see that people turn away from God, and then he gets their attention. Whether it's famine and plague, whether it's being hauled off to Babylon, he gets their attention, and he uses that. He sends prophets with a message that says, repent, come back to me. And he says through one of the prophets, if my people who are called according to my name will humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and I will heal their land. God uses these trials, these bad times, to call people back, okay? to bring them. His desire is to bring people to him. I'm preparing you for Revelation. And I'm telling you that this horrible time in Revelation is his last call. It's an opportunity. We see it as a punishment. But we see in the book of Revelation that there are people who will believe during this time of the tribulation, who will come to believe Christ and become his during this horrible time. It is the last call, though. And it's the same as the other ones. It's just bigger and uglier. And the hearts of humans have by the time of the end, have become so hardened and so corrupted, there won't be a whole lot, but there will be people who are called and believe during that time. So we look at Revelation as being this horrible punishment by God. At the end, there is that. But in the meantime, this tribulation is his last call. And people, we're told, hear it. Broken record. By the time we get to Revelation, you're going to realize that what you've been told, look how horrible this is not really horror. The horror is right now that people's hearts are so hardened. And I'm going to say something unpopular here, but we live in a place right now where not only are babies aborted, but they sell their body parts. They have a menu. You want brains? We can get you brains. How horrific is that? How far has humanity descended into this absence of God that something like that is possible? This is the horror show. The last call that happens after that, when the last person has accepted, God's going to say, okay, enough. Now it's over. Now I'm fixing everything. And we're told that. That's what Revelation is. Don't be frightened by the fear doctrine that people will send to you. Yes.
I always think of how not to be frightened, but to read the stoning of Stephen. Because Stephen was alive, getting hit with boulders, yet he got this blow.
I hope and pray that if I'm ever tested to that limit, that I will have that strength. I mean, that's part of it, and you prepare for those things in advance. But you're right, that's a beautiful example of it.
If he's already, he's not here anymore. Even though he's still breathing, he's looking up, he's seeing.
All right, well, we're getting close to the end of the prep. We've got more to go.
Well, Scott, I'm sorry. I didn't hear John Paul. Real quick, can you give us a summary?
He was talking about, if you want to understand not being afraid, look at the death of Stephen.
Okay, got it.
And Stephen, and it's a beautiful example of it. And yet you see what was required of him, but then you see Jesus saying, I lay down my life. Nobody takes it from me, right? He laid down his life. And so that's the example to us. Is it hard at times? Do we hear these things and go, oh man, I would prefer not to have to go through that. I would prefer not to have my legs hurt all the time. Yeah, we go through some things. This is important.
So where we are, just so you know this, so this prophecy, Gabriel is explaining to Daniel what's going on. And it is believed up to where we stopped has historically happened. Starting in verse 36 to the end of 44 and then chapter 12. This has not happened yet. So once again, these are end time prophecies and there's a change. So that's where we'll start next week. And like we said, hopefully will be the last prep before we
Yeah,
go
I
into
hope we
Revelation.
haven't left any of you, feeling like you've been cheated because we haven't moved to Revelation yet. We will.
We're getting there.
We will, but it's so important, especially to me who grew up with the fear doctrine, with people just literally giving up their lives, that I wanted to try and prepare you for what's going to happen when we study Revelation. Yes, someone else? Nope. Okay, let's go. God, we are thankful that you thought enough of us to leave this message behind, to give to Daniel, to leave behind for us so that we can see that you're involved, that you do care about us, that there is a plan, that we don't have to make the plan. We don't have to to make things happen in this time. And this week, the thing that I would ask is those words that were in Matthew, where Jesus tells us that we've been left here to look after your business until you do return, and to give us the presence to remember that as people are sent into our lives, that it's our job, that you specifically left us here to be your arms and legs, your mouth to the other children who need that. Give us the presence to remember it and to be that, and not to worry about the things that aren't even ours to change. Amen.
Amen.
I'm going to send out an email to everybody, and I know some of those of you who come in present don't look at the emails because we just come, but there's been a request. Lots of people want to send notes to other people, etc. And I don't want to share addresses. And first of all, I don't have everybody's address. But if you're okay with it, when I send an email, send back your address to me. I'll do the BCC like I usually do, so it'll just go to me. And then I will put together a spreadsheet of everybody's contact information that's willing to share it and send it back out. So those of you who don't look at emails, please look at emails this week.
We're finding, and even things like cards, and Cindy and Paula, it's got Cindy's name, but they're very good. But I know that Lisa and I can't say her name, but they sent something to Kelly. Those things are important. We're part of a body, and because we're sort of distributed, to have the ability for someone to contact you that says you've been on my heart, that's important. So if you're comfortable with it, send us that address and contact, and allow people to reach out to each other. I think it's a great gift.
And those of you in this room, I will put a thing here, and you can just write your address here, because I know some of you won't go and look at your emails.
Lisa and Kay. All of a sudden I couldn't say Kay Bramlett's name. It was Kay that did it.
Okay.
We enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Scott and Mary, for
Thank
doing
y'all.
the list
Thank you, Scott and Mary.
also.
Yeah, that was great. Thank y'all. Turned it off.
You guys enjoy. We'll see you next week.